This is the arc length and sector area practice. Okay, with the review on it. So half of this was the arc length and sector area. The second half was some review questions. So 1 through 5 here, we want to find the arc length. So again, we want to remember that the arc measure is not the same thing as the arc length. The arc measure is out of 300, basically saying how much of the circle. So a circle has 360 degrees. So in this case, here's our central angle is 120. So we know our arc length here is also going to be our arc measure is 120. It's 120 degrees out of 360. So it's basically telling us how much of the circle we're looking at, what proportion of the circle, what part of the circle we're looking at. The arc length is the actual length of the circle itself. If you were to actually measure how long it was as opposed to what part of the circle it was. So again, to find arc length, so I'm going to just say AL for arc length. Okay, we have to take what portion of the circle we're looking at. So our arc measure divided by 360. Okay, X is our arc measure, the measure of the arc, the part of the circle we're trying to find the length of, the portion of the circle we're trying to find the length of. We want to multiply by the circumference, right? So the circumference of the circle is the length of the entire circle. We don't want the length of the whole circle, though. We only want length of the 120 degrees part of it. So this is telling us the circumference, the total length around the circle. This is saying we don't want all of it. We only want a fraction of it. We only want a part of it. In this case, we want 120 degrees of it. So arc length here is going to equal 120 out of 360. Then we want to multiply by the circumference, which is 2 pi times r. The radius here is 11 inches. Right? So again, arc length is going to equal 120 divided by 360 gives us a third. And this is going to give us 22 pi. So you can do this all at once in your calculator. But I'm just trying to demonstrate that here is the sections. Here's the circumference of the circle. So all the way around the circle, the length of the entire circle is 22 pi. But we're not looking at the length of the entire thing. We only want the length of a third of it. Okay, and we know it's a third of it because we have 120 degrees out of 360. So that's a third of the length around the circle. So if we multiply a third, because that's the portion we want, a third of it, we multiply the whole length by a third, and that gives us the portion we want. So that's going to be 22 pi over 3, or we can write that as a decimal, 22 pi, 1/3 times 22 pi, or 22 pi divided by 3 will give us 23.0. 23.0 inches. So arc length, the length of this arc is 23 inches. The measure is 120 degrees. The arc measure is 120 degrees. The arc length is 23 inches. Okay, it's 120 degrees out of 360 of the circle. And the distance of along the circle itself is 23 inches. Okay, number 2. Let me erase this. Okay, number 2. We're looking at this arc right here. So again, it says 300 degrees. So we're only looking at an angle. We're looking at not at the entire circumference, but 300 degrees of the entire circumference. So 300 out of 360 will give us the fraction of how much of the circle we're looking at, how much of the circumference we're looking at. And then we want to multiply by the entire circumference. So again, arc length is going to be how much of the circle are we looking at? We're looking at 300 degrees out of 360 degrees of it. And we multiply by the circumference, 2 pi r. So the circumference is 2 pi times 15. Okay, so that's going to be 7/8, right? Oh no, 5, 6, that was right. Okay, so the circumference of the whole thing is 30 pi, but we don't want the entire 30 pi. We only want the length of this part. So that's 5, 6 of the whole circle. So 5, 6 times the entire thing is whatever that would be, 150 pi over 6. Okay, so 150 times pi divided by 6 is going to give us 78.5 inches. Okay. So the entire thing, so that's like 30 pi is 94. So the entire thing around the circumference is 94, but our piece is 78, which means that piece is whatever 94.2478 minus 78.5 is. All right, 3 and 4 and 5. We can do them all the same one here. Let's not erase the whole thing. Okay, so let's keep our equation up. Okay. So again, our length here is 270 out of 360. So we're not looking at the whole 360 degrees. We're only looking at 270 degrees of it. Okay. The circumference of the whole circle is 16 pi. But again, we don't want the whole circle. We only want 3/4 of it. So 270 to 360 is going to give us 3/4. Okay, so we want 3/4 of the whole circumference is 16 pi. We only want 3/4 of it. So 3 times 16 pi divided by 4 is 37.7 centimeters. Okay, so the length of this arc is 37.7 centimeters. The length of the whole thing is 16 pi centimeters, which is 50 centimeters. So this whole circumference length is, the whole circle is 360 degrees. The length is 16 pi, which is 50.3 centimeters. But we don't want the whole thing. We only want 3/4 of it. We only want 270 degrees out of 360. So that's going to be 3/4 times 16 pi, 37.7. Okay. The next one is very similar to this one. Okay, it's still 3/4 of the circle, but this time our radius is 14. Okay, so the length of the entire circumference is 28 pi. And again, we said this was 3/4 of the circle, so we're only looking at 3/4 of the circle. So 14 pi times, or 828 pi, 28 times pi times 3 divided by 4. It's going to give us 66.0. 66.0 miles is the arc length. So again, the measure of the arc here is 270 degrees because it's equal to the measure of the central angle. But the length of it is 3/4 of the entire circumference. So the entire circumference is 28 pi miles. We're just taking 3/4 of it because 270 out of 360 is 3/4. Number 5, same thing. We want this part right here. So our angle measure is 120. So we have 120. 120 out of 360. So we only have a third of it now. 120 divided by 360 is a third. So now we're only looking at a third of the circumference. Okay, multiplying by 2 pi times 9. So that's going to be 18 pi. So the entire circumference is 18 pi, but we only want a third of it. So that's going to be 6 pi, which is about 18.8 inches. 18.8 inches. The whole thing is 18 pi. This piece is just 6 pi. A third. We're looking at a third of the length of the circumference. Okay, 6 through 10 here, we are finding the area, the sector area of each of these. Okay, so again, our sector area formula was the portion of the circle we're looking at times the total area of the circle. Okay, so the total area of the circle here is pi r squared, but we don't want pi r squared. We only want this portion of the circle. Okay. We notice this central angle is 270 degrees, so we know the arc here, the measure of the arc is 270 degrees. So we want to take the measure of the arc, so 270 out of 360. So again, that is only 3/4. Sector area is 3/4 of the total area. So we got to multiply 3/4 by the total area. So that was pi r squared. So pi times 10 squared. So that's times 100 pi. So that's 300 pi divided by 4 is 235.6. So the sector area is 235.6 miles squared. So the area of all of this is 100 pi. Okay, but we don't want all of it. We only want the portion here. So we want to subtract away this piece. So we're multiplying by 3/4. We only want 3/4 of the whole circle. Okay, we want 3/4 of the area of the whole circle. So this answer here is going to be 3/4 of 100 pi. 100 pi would be 314. So the whole area is 314. We only want 3/4 of it, which is 235. Right, number 7. Okay. Again, we can leave the equation. Okay, it's the same equation, sector area still. Okay, this time we have a radius. So we have, again, we're looking at 270. So we're looking at 3/4 of the circle. And this time we have a radius of 15. 15 squared is 225. So again, we're looking at 3/4 of the circle times 225 pi. So 225 pi is the area of the entire circle, but we don't want the area of the entire circle. We only want 3/4 of it. So 225 pi times 3 divided by 4 is going to give us 530.1. Okay, 1 meters squared. Okay, so 225 times pi is 707. So the area of this whole circle is 707, but we don't want the area of the whole thing. We just want the area of this piece. So that's 3/4 of the whole circle. So 3/4 times 706, or 22 pi, is the same as 706. It's going to give us the area of just our piece. Let's look at 8 and 9. Okay, so again, our sector area formula is going to equal the portion of the circle, so x over 360 times the area of the whole circle. So again, we're looking at 270, so we're looking at 3/4. This time the area is going to be pi times 6 squared. Okay. So again, that's 3/4 times 36 pi. So the area of the whole circle is 36 pi, which is about 100 and something, which is 113. Okay, but we don't want the area of the whole circle. We only want 3/4 of it. So 113.097 times 3 divided by 4 is going to give us 84.8. So our sector area is going to be equal to 84.8 feet squared. Okay. Number 9. Okay, sector. So that's number 8. Number 9 here. We have 315 degrees, so that's going to be 315 over 360. Okay, then we multiply by the area of the whole thing, which is pi times 16 squared. Okay, so our sector area is going to equal, so we don't want the whole circle, we only want 315 degrees of it. So we want 7/8 of it. Okay, and 16, that's going to be 256 pi. So the area of the whole thing is 256 pi, but we don't want 256 pi. We only want 7/8 of it. So multiply by 7, divide by 8, we get 703.7. 703.7 yards squared. Square yards. The last one, number 10 here. Okay, so we're only looking at 90 out of 360, so we're going to end up only looking at 1/4 of our circle. Okay, so again, sector area is going to equal so the whole area is pi r squared. The portion we're looking at is x over 360. So again, this is sector area of a section. It's going to be, that's 90. We're looking only at 90. So the measure of the angle here is 90 out of 360, which again is 1/4 of the whole circle. And the area of the whole circle is pi r squared. So that is 8 is our radius. So that is 64 pi. Right? So the whole area of all this here is 64 pi. We don't want all of it. We only want part of it. So it's going to turn out that it's 16 pi. And we know 16 pi is approximately 50.3 meters squared. So that's the arc length and sector area. We are looking at either the entire circumference or the entire area and multiplying by the fraction of the circle that we want. So we've taken the fraction of the circle we're looking at, multiplying by either the circumference, which is 2 pi r, to get the arc length, or we multiply by the area of the whole circle, pi r squared, to get the sector area. So we're looking, instead of finding the area of the whole thing or circumference of the whole thing, we want part of it. Part of the circumference, which is an arc, or part of the area, which is the sector area. And that is that.